China and Taiwan did not drift apart slowly. They were torn apart by war. The split happened at the end of a struggle so violent and so chaotic that when it was over, both sides still claimed they were the real China. One controlled the mainland. The other fled to an island and said the fight was not finished. More than 70 years later, that unfinished ending still shapes one of the most dangerous rivalries in the world. The roots go back to the collapse of Imperial China. In 1912, the Qing dynasty fell, and the old empire gave way to the Republic of China. The dream was to build a modern state out of a country that had been weakened by internal decay, foreign pressure, and political fragmentation. At the center of that dream was Sun Yat-sen, the revolutionary figure later remembered as the founder of modern China. He wanted a unified republic, stronger institutions, and a country that could survive in the modern world. But Sun did not live long enough to secure that future. After his death, the movement he helped build was pulled in different directions. One path was represented by Chiang Kai-shek, a nationalist military leader who believed China needed central authority, discipline, and order before anything like democracy could survive. The other path was represented by Mao Zedong, a revolutionary who believed China's future would be decided not in elite politics or major cities, but by the peasantry spread across the countryside. At first, nationalists and communists were not outright enemies. In the 1920s, they cooperated uneasily because both wanted to reunify China and break the power of regional warlords. But the alliance was fragile from the beginning. Chiang saw the communists as a threat growing inside the nationalist movement itself. In 1927, he moved first. In Shanghai, nationalist forces carried out a violent purge against communist members and supporters. The alliance collapsed in blood, and the Chinese Civil War truly began. For the communists, the years that followed were a fight for survival. They were hunted, pushed out of urban strongholds, and forced to rebuild in rural base areas. Mao's great insight was that China's vast peasant population could become the foundation of revolution. Instead of relying on the industrial working class in big cities, he built support in the countryside, where poverty, land hunger, and resentment against local elites created fertile ground for radical politics. Chiang tried repeatedly to crush these communist bases. By the early 1930s, the nationalist government launched a series of encirclement campaigns designed to destroy them for good. The final offensive nearly succeeded. Faced with annihilation, the communists broke out and began one of the most famous retreats in modern history, the Long March. Over thousands of miles, through mountains, rivers, mud, cold, hunger, and constant attack, the communist forces staggered west and north. Most did not survive, but the movement itself did. The Long March turned a near defeat into a founding legend. It also helped Mao rise above his rivals and take command of the revolution's direction. Then history intervened. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. Faced with an external enemy, the nationalists and communists entered another uneasy partnership. But even while both resisted Japan, they were preparing for the struggle that would follow. Chiang carried the burden of the main conventional war, relying heavily on international recognition and outside support. Mao used the war years to expand communist influence behind the lines, organizing villages, building parallel political structures, and turning guerrilla resistance into long-term territorial control. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the alliance immediately began to unravel. China had not been reunited by victory. It had been left armed, divided, and exhausted. The United States tried to mediate a political settlement, hoping to prevent a renewed civil war, but neither side trusted the other enough to compromise for long. Talks were held. Agreements were announced. None of it held. Once the war resumed, the nationalists looked stronger on paper. They had more troops, international recognition, better equipment, and access to American aid. But those advantages masked deep weaknesses. The nationalist government had become associated with corruption, elite privilege, and economic disaster. Inflation spiraled out of control. Confidence collapsed. Soldiers were badly led, morale deteriorated, and public support eroded in the cities the nationalists depended on. The communists, by contrast, were disciplined, politically focused, and increasingly effective in war. Their land policies helped them win support in the countryside. Their military adapted quickly. As the conflict intensified, nationalist forces began to crumble. Entire formations defected or disintegrated. One major campaign after another swung in communist favor, especially in the Northeast, where the balance of the war shifted decisively. By 1949, the collapse was moving at breathtaking speed. Major cities fell one after another. Beijing was taken. Nanjing, the nationalist capital, was lost. Shanghai followed. The nationalist government was no longer losing ground gradually. It was coming apart. Mao's side was no longer a rebel movement fighting for survival. It was the new ruling power of China. On October 1, 1949, Mao proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China in Beijing. For the communist movement, that was the triumph of a revolution decades in the making. For Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China, it was not the formal end. It was the beginning of retreat. As communist victory became unavoidable, Chiang and the remnants of his government pulled back to Taiwan. This was not a small evacuation. Soldiers, officials, business families, scholars, and refugees crossed the strait in huge numbers. Along with them came key state assets, including gold reserves and priceless treasures from the imperial collections. These transfers mattered enormously. They gave the government on Taiwan financial and symbolic resources that helped it survive after the loss of the mainland. When Chiang established his government in Taipei, he did not present it as a new country. He insisted that the Republic of China still existed, that it remained the lawful government of all China, and that Taiwan was only a temporary base until the mainland could be recovered. From his perspective, the Civil War was unfinished. Retreat was not surrender. At that moment, Taiwan's future looked bleak. Many believed communist forces would soon cross the strait and finish the war. The new government in Beijing intended to do exactly that. The United States, frustrated with Chiang and weary after World War II, showed little appetite for another major commitment in Asia. If events had continued on that path, Taiwan might well have been absorbed in the early 1950s. Then the Korean War changed everything. When North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, Washington abruptly rethought the strategic map of East Asia. President Truman sent the U.S. 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait. That move effectively blocked an immediate communist invasion and placed Taiwan inside a new American security framework. Its survival was no longer just about Chinese politics. It had become part of the Cold War. From that point on, one of the strangest diplomatic arrangements in modern history took shape. There were now two rival governments, each claiming to represent China. The People's Republic controlled the mainland and the overwhelming majority of the population. The Republic of China controlled Taiwan and a handful of surrounding islands. Yet for years, it retained China's seat in the United Nations and on the Security Council. In Cold War terms, many Western governments continued to treat Taipei as the official China, even though Beijing held the mainland itself. That arrangement lasted longer than many expected, but not forever. As the global balance shifted, the United States moved toward rapprochement with Beijing. Strategic logic overrode old loyalties. In 1971, the United Nations transferred China's seat from Taipei to Beijing. In 1979, Washington formally recognized the People's Republic of China and ended official diplomatic recognition of the Republic of China on Taiwan. Taiwan was not simply abandoned, though. The United States kept an unofficial relationship through the Taiwan Relations Act, which preserved commercial and political ties and provided a framework for continued arms sales. That ambiguity became the foundation of the modern status quo. Taiwan would not be formally recognized by most countries as an independent state, but neither would it be left entirely undefended. Over time, Taiwan changed in ways that made the old Civil War narrative less and less adequate. It evolved from authoritarian rule into a vibrant democracy. It developed its own political identity, its own institutions, its own elections, and its own public life. For many people on the island today, Taiwan is not a temporary refuge waiting to reclaim the mainland. It is home, and it is distinct. That is what makes the issue so difficult. In practical terms, Taiwan functions like a sovereign state. It has its own government, military, passport, and economy. But in diplomatic terms, its status remains deliberately unresolved. Beijing insists Taiwan is part of China and must eventually be unified with the mainland. Many in Taiwan reject that future, especially under the political system of the People's Republic. The United States, meanwhile, tries to deter war without fully resolving the question. So the split between China and Taiwan began not as a debate over identity in the abstract, but as the unfinished result of a civil war. One side won the mainland, the other survived offshore. Both claimed legitimacy. Neither signed a final peace. What remains today is not just a dispute over territory, but the last open chapter of a conflict that never truly received an ending.